Mr. O'Hanlon, the White House only talked about for the benefits of the Syrian people, did not voice much hope about the result of this truce. What do you make of it?
Well, I've been a critic of Secretary Kerry's approach because I don't think it's consistent with battlefield reality. So I'm even less optimistic than Secretary Kerry or President Obama. I think we're in a situation where the extremist groups have most of the power and where Russia's intervention has strengthened President Assad, and the moderate forces that we've been trying to help, we've done a very bad job of helping them. They are very weak. They have been beaten largely on the battlefield, and therefore there are not really conditions for a stable, balanced ceasefire. Perhaps a temporary way to get food to afflicted regions could be very useful and helpful, but I don't have any more hope than that.
On the other hand, it seems that the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Mr. Matuzov, are much more confident than his American counterpart. He said that this, and I quote, "This could be the agreement itself, radically changing the crisis situation in Syria," end of quote. What do you think, Mr. Matuzov, is backing his confidence?
A Russian president is more confident in this truce agreement. Why? Because from Russian side, any conditions that were laid down before this agreement can be fulfilled. Russia in very good contact, constant contact with Syrian authorities, and Russian military personnel in Syria in full contact with Syrian army and chief of commander and with field commanders of Syrian army. So we have a situation absolutely controlled from the Russian and Syrian side. But I cannot say the same thing about opportunity of the United States to control situation of the same kind from oppositional side. Because we heard 5 years that opposition has some armed organizations, some armed troops who are fighting Syrian government, Syrian army. But when this agreement was concluded, we found out that approximately all oppositional groups, it's occurred to be terroristic groups belonging to Jabhat al-Nusra or Daesh.
All right.
That means that there is no counter-partner for Syrian government to talk to.
Okay.
And political opposition spread between Washington, Paris, London, and Istanbul can no right to give orders to some organization.
Mr. O'Hanlon,
they didn't obey.
Mr. O'Hanlon, how would you respond to your Russian counterpart's accusation that the opposition groups, first of all, it's United States' responsibility to line up these opposition groups to participate in a negotiation which might be leading to a truce or to a better result? And secondly, many of the oppositions that the U.S. have in mind, in fact, are part of the terrorist groups, whether it's Nusra or al-Qaeda.
Well, let me first say, I think the United States has done a very bad job throughout this war. I think we have supported an opposition to President Assad rhetorically, but then we did not help it in any meaningful way militarily, and we allowed a chaos to develop that has been regrettable. Then Russia moved in last year. I don't think that Russia's motives have been very good either, but I don't think that we are in a position to be very critical because we had done such a bad job for the previous 4 years. And now the moderate opposition is very weak and very fractured, and that is a result of our poor policies of the last 5 years. And we're going to have to strengthen the moderate opposition before we can have a stable peace deal. I think someday we could have a Bosnia-style confederation in which there is an Alawite sector, in which there is a Kurdish sector, in which there are peacekeeping troops, including from Russia and the United States, and that's the way, I think, to compromise. But the conditions are not yet ripe for that, because first we need to strengthen the moderate opposition in a way that we have not yet done so.
Ms. He, sitting here listening to the other two gentlemen, what do you make of it, of the amount of efforts they willing to make, and their individual countries willing to make in order to make things happen? The thing, of course, I'm referring to is peace. And secondly, what do you make of the current status of Moscow and Washington in terms of being the key of providing solutions to Syria?
Well, I think after almost 5 years of this civil war in Syria, now it's not a time right now to talk about which country's policy now is bad or good. Like our American colleagues now is mentioned, is very poor policy, has been done by the Obama government. Now we need to do is how to implement this truce, because this truce now it's not so easy to get it. So how to implement it and then to make this Syria, this country, still a united one. Not talking about how to divide it and then to rule by different country. About this used to be a very united country. That will be very sad, plan B, because I have heard, and then some country may be talking about plan B, talking about how to deal with a failed implementation of this truce. So nowadays, the key issue is how to implement it. But now this is the thing very short of. We only heard about this truce by telephone call, by consultation between two big powers, and then we haven't heard those follow-up mechanisms. That is, who is going to watch it? Who is going to monitor it? And there is a hotline saying we are receiving those reporting things. So on the ground, maybe there are thousands different factions.
Right.
Yeah, opposition party, there are many. And also, so if any faction, they violation this truce, and then what kind of follow-up punishment will be deal with.
You mentioned
That's
several
very
things.
important.
One is what the oppositions are about.
Yes.
In fact, who they are, what are they looking for, and also what about the systematic approach in order to implement the specific truth. We have several things to talk about, but first let's focus on one of the points that many of you have talked about, which is the opposition. The opposition parties' stances are perhaps very worrying because they're very different. On the one hand, their foreign support is not as strong as Assad, and on the other hand, they are not as destructive as another enemy of Assad, which is ISIS, which is known to use all sorts of means, including suicide bombs, to achieve their goals. As we can tell from this picture, the opposition groups are contained only in the small light green area. Given the fact that they themselves haven't solved the problem of unity, what could be the best result for the opposition groups after 2 weeks of cessation of hostilities? And what would be the role of Russia in that regard when you are talking about very hard to distinguish so-called terrorists and also the oppositions? Mr. Matuzov, it seems a lot of responsibilities are in Moscow's hands. You cannot just attack the opposition as if they were the terrorists, can you?
Well, we met quite a lot of times with opposition leaders, about 2 years. All delegations from all factions of opposition, national coalition, and different other came to Moscow. And they talked to Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, with others, to bring these opposition groups to Geneva, to Vienna, to Munich, to international conference to settle all issues. They refused. They refused persistently. They insist to be conditioned by resignment of Bashar al-Assad and changing regime and so on. It was an unsuccessful effort, and I think that now when Russian Air Cosmic Forces entered Latakia and strongly supported Syrian army that are now day after day are taking positions, three new cities, villages in North Syria on the border of Turkey, because Turkey was the main sponsor of Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda. And now it is obvious, because when all those groups, military groups, the north to Aleppo, found themselves surrounded by Syrian army, they were cut by supplying of ammunition
Okay.
and any weapon and so on.
Listening to
So
you-
I think that main issue today to find moderate opposition.
Okay.
Where are they on the field of battle?
Where are they? Mr. O'Hanlon, from the U.S. side, you probably have a better idea about the opposition's current status. Where are they, according to Mr. Matsuzov?
Well, many of them have been killed in the last 5 years mostly because my country did not support them as much as we had promised. I'm very critical of my government's policy. I think that we hoped that somehow an opposition to Assad would magically unite and require him to step down from power, and that it would be another essentially bloodless part of the Arab Spring. And we never quite got beyond that set of assumptions. So I think we have allowed the moderate opposition to be decimated, and sometimes it had to ally with the more extreme elements, al-Nusra or ISIS, on the battlefield to survive.
All right.
And again, we left it no real choice. So I think it's largely our fault, and we're going to have to strengthen that moderate opposition before it can be a viable participant in a future
But
peace
Mr. O'Hanlon,
process.
if I could just jump in, it seems you are trying to suggest, well, mistakes have been made by the U.S. government regarding the opposition. But what kind of exact role is Washington going to play in implementing this specific ceasefire, in implementing this specific truce coming during the weekend? Is Washington trying to escape its responsibilities?
I think so. I think we have been trying to escape our responsibilities for 5 years in this war. And I don't think the ceasefire will hold up very well. I think it might last long enough to get some food in to some of the most afflicted areas that have been cut off by President Assad. And by the way, I am also critical of Russia, because I think Russia is allowing President Assad to do some terrible things, including using food as a weapon and using barrel bombs as weapons. So I'm also critical of Moscow. But the United States had 4 years to make progress in this conflict before Russia ever intervened, and we did not do so, primarily because President Obama is trying to minimize the American role in this conflict.
All right. Mr. Matsuzov, you heard your American colleague. How would you respond?
Well, I can say that the last 4 months that Russia sent cosmic air forces to Syria. They use now all this military presence in Syria on political gains, of course. But I remind my colleague from the United States that before 4 months, Russia wasn't involved directly to Syrian crisis. But United States were involved by their air forces. They're bombing some Syrian territory without any permission of the United Nations, about no permission of the Syrian government. It was absolutely clear violation on international law. But Russia didn't make any move, didn't even, in my opinion, Russia doesn't help properly the Syrian army because it was under pressure of the United States, Europe, Ukrainian events. Everything was prevented Russia from proper help to Syrian army. Today, situation changed dramatically. And I remind you that Mr. Kerry, while he was talking on Syrian issue in Security Council, he said a very strong phrase. It is matter of fact, given the situation on the ground.
Okay.
That means that situation on the ground dictate the political solution.
Okay.
Russia is ready to change military gains for political solution.
All right.
I am not sure
Miss-
that the United States and
Mi- mi-
opposition
okay,
are capable
well,